Today I'm sharing an easy way to combine stamping and die cutting using Mini Delight Blooming Lantana. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. Usually in my videos I like to focus on a technique, but this set is so unique that I wanted to share it with you today. But I'll also be sharing some tips and tricks for creating clean and simple cards along the way. So let's get started. This is the Mini Delight Blooming Lantana Stamp and Die Set. So you've got the dies that work as the flowers on top of the stamp set, which is the stem and the leaves. And it also stamps out the letters so that you can use them to line up the die cuts, which is just such a great way to be able to do it. But first I want to add a little bit of detail onto my panel here. This is an A2 size card panel, so 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And I'm going to add some scoring lines towards the bottom. Usually with clean and simple cards, I do like to add something onto them. Quite often it's maybe a strip of cardstock along the bottom, or maybe patterned paper or something like that. For today I thought I would just add some scoring lines. Now unfortunately these don't show up in the photos, but in real life it really does add a nice just finishing touch towards the bottom of the card. And you can see it in the video, you just unfortunately can't see it in the photos. So I'm just scoring 3 lines there towards the bottom using that stylus that comes with the scoring board, and you can see those there at the bottom. I do want to add those first so that I've got an idea of where I want to add the stamping on top. So I've placed the panel inside my stamp wheel, and now I'm taking that stem and leaves image with those letters at the top there for the flowers, and now I can line that up towards the top of the card panel. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can bring in the top flip plate of the stamp wheel, pop that down in place, and then pick up that stamp. I can then flip that over and ink up the stamp using Obsidian pigment ink. This is a really nice dark crisp black ink. I'm not adding any colour to the stem and leaves today, but if you were going to do that with pencils or markers or anything like that, you would want to make sure that you picked an appropriate ink pad for that. So I'm just stamping that down onto the panel. I decided not to add colour to this card. That's another way for me to add kind of like a clean and simple touch to a card, is not to add too much colour. So I'm pretty much keeping the card black and white, and then the pop of purple on the flowers. I got a pretty good impression the first time, but a little area on one of the leaves didn't quite stamp perfectly. So I'm just going to ink up that stamp again, flip that over, and then I can stamp that for a second time, just to make sure that I get a really nice impression of that image. I can then remove that from the stamp wheel, and I can set that aside to dry. This pigment ink does dry pretty quickly, but I do just want to make sure that that's set really nicely. I can then stamp my sentiment onto a separate piece of cardstock, and I'm using there a little hello sentiment that comes in that set. So just placing that down onto the cardstock there, I can bring in the top flip plate of the stamp wheel again, pop that in place to pick up that stamp, and again I'm going to stamp this with the Obsidian pigment ink. So just inking that up, and then I can stamp that down. And I know that I got a good enough impression the first time, but I am just going to stamp it for a second time. So just pressing that down, and again I can set that aside to dry. I'm then going to work on the die cutting portion. So this set cuts out the base layers, and then also a middle layer and then a top layer of these flowers. I have cut them all from Classic Crest 110 soda white cardstock. So that's the top layer there. This is the base layers, and then this is the middle layers. And I'm going to keep these white of the cardstock because I wanted the center of the flowers to be white, but you could do these all sorts of colours. When I was researching these flowers, I did find a lot of the flower centres were yellow, but I did find some purple flowers that had white centres, and that's what I'm using today. So these pieces do cut out the letters that correspond with the stamp set into the middle of these layers. So I'm just using my perfect picker here to pop them out. So you can see there that that is the letter C. And then I can pop this one out here, and that is the letter K. So I can now add some colour onto these die cuts. I have placed them down onto my sticky mat in alphabetical order. I do just want to mention that there is no O, it goes from N to P, just in case you worry that you may have missed that one out. I'm using the Shades of Purple Fresh Dye Ink collection today. And I'm going in with a mini blending brush, and I'm going in with the lightest shade first of these inks, which is Soft Lilac, just adding a base layer of this colour down. I could definitely have cut these from coloured cardstock. That would speed up the process, but I do often like to add some ink blending. Even if I cut them from coloured cardstock, I probably would add a little bit of ink blending on top anyway. And these flowers are so small that they added, you know, the ink blending went really quite quickly. So I'm now going in with the second shade, which is Lavender Fields, and I'm trying to focus this colour towards the centre of these flowers. I wanted it to be a little bit lighter on the edges of these petals. I could have gone in with a micro blending brush and that would have given me a little bit more control, but I was quite happy with how these turned out. Because that first colour is so light, I did want to add quite a bit of the second shade on top. So I'm going to set those aside to dry. As I'm taking these off my sticky mat, I am still placing them down in alphabetical order. It doesn't really matter too much, but I am going to find it a little bit easier when I come to assemble the flowers by having them in the alphabetical order. So I've missed out the middle layer. I'm now going in with the top layer, and I'm using the Deep Iris colour for this. And I'm just going to do a flat layer of colour with this shade of ink. Again, using that mini blending brush. Again, I probably could have added a little bit of extra ink blending onto this with the darkest shade, but these are so tiny, these flower centres, that I decided just to keep them at the one shade of ink. So again, I can set those aside to dry, and I've got my panel here that's nice and dry. I'm going to add some glue tape onto the back of that. And I can adhere it down onto my card base. So that is an A2 size white card base, a finished size of 4 1/4 inches by 5.5 inches. And I can place my panel down on top, just trying to line it up as best as possible. If it's slightly off, I can take that to my guillotine and just cut that down. So once I'm happy with the placement, I can press that down. I have gone on to the Altenew website and I have printed this off. Because the packaging is so tiny, it doesn't show all of the steps to be able to kind of line these up. So it shows that you want to add some flowers on first, then go in with the middle layer and then the top layer, and then you want to adhere the rest of them down, and then again go in with the middle layer and the top layer. So that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm starting off with the first set of flowers, and you do want to go in alphabetical order. So I'm starting off with A, and I'm going to add some liquid glue onto the back of that. And I've got a couple of pieces of cardstock just hanging around from that die cutting process. So I'm just using my tweezers there just to remove those before I stick that down. And you can see that the cutout of the die cut lines up perfectly with the stamped A. So I can go along with all of these letters and adhere them down. I'm using liquid glue today, and I'm just adding a small amount of that around the opening of that letter. I do want to hopefully be able to go in afterwards and just lift up those petals, the edges of those petals a little bit. And so I don't want to add glue all the way to the edges of them. You could definitely add these on with foam tape, and I was tempted to do that, but this is the first time I've used this set and I wasn't sure how they overlapped exactly. Some of these flowers do overlap with each other, and so I thought it'd be easier for me just to adhere them down flat. But if I do this again, I probably would go in with some foam tape to add a little bit of dimension onto this. So I've gone in with that A, the B, the C, the D and the E now, and then I can go in here with that F, and you can see that these ones here on the right hand side do kind of layer on top of each other quite a bit. And these line up really nicely. They're pretty self-explanatory because you've got those letters. I will say at this point I messed up and I put the G upside down. That's the only letter that I found that was harder maybe to figure out exactly which way round it went, but I looked at those instructions that I printed off and I could see that it was supposed to be this way round. To be honest, if I'd added it upside down, I don't think it really would have mattered too much for the finished result, but it may have meant that that flower cluster was probably a little bit less round. So now I've gone in with that H, and now I can finish off with that K there. I've then got all of these middle pieces. Again, like I say, I've left them without the colour so that my flower centres are white. I am using that assembly guide to figure out the orientation of these pieces on top of the base layer. To be honest with you, I think if I'd got some wrong, it wouldn't have really mattered too much. I think the flower would still look really pretty, but I do just want to make sure that I'm covering up those letters so that you can't see them. So again, just using that liquid glue, adding a small amount of that onto the back of these pieces and placing those down with the tweezers. I hadn't actually come across this flower before. I felt that it looked a little bit like a hydrangea. It is completely different. I think these are a lot smaller in size than hydrangeas, and a lot of them come in really bright colours. So like they often have pink outside flowers, and then as it goes into the centre of the cluster, they tend to be a little bit more yellow. But I did find some that were this purple colour, and I thought that they were really pretty with the white flower centres, but I do think the yellow flower centres are a little bit more common. So I'm now going in with those top layer pieces, again adding a little bit of liquid glue onto the back of those, and I can layer them up on top of those white layers. So I finished off that first layer, and now I can go back in with the rest of the letter pieces. So I'm going in with the I there, followed by the J. I've got the L there. I will say the K and the L are completely different in terms of, you know, going in the alphabet order, but it obviously worked out better for them to do it that way. And then I can finish off with the P here. And then again, I can go in with that middle layer, just adding those all in place and then finishing off with those top layers. And I really like how that purple kind of pops against the black and white. As I say, I definitely could have gone in maybe with a stronger colour, and that maybe would have popped a little bit more, but I do really love purple flowers. For the sentiment, I want to cut that and make it into a tag. So I'm taking one of the smaller dies from the Nesting Circles die set. I think this is the third smallest size. I thought that that size worked really nicely for this sentiment. So I'm holding it down with some low tack tape, and then I'm running that through my die cutting machine. I'm then taking a pencil and I'm just going to make a mark towards the top so that I know where I want to punch a hole, and I'm using a handheld punch here just to punch that hole there at the top. I'm not actually going to thread my twine through it because I thought it may be a little bit too fiddly, but I do want to punch that hole so it kind of looks a little bit more like a tag, but it is going to end up more as a sort of fake tag. I can add some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of that, and then I am going to add a little bit more towards the top there to cover up that hole. I can then adhere that down onto my card. And I'm just going to place it down really lightly to start with, bring in my T-square ruler to make sure that that is straight, and it isn't completely, so I'm just going to lift that up a little bit with my tweezers and make sure that that is straight. I can then grab some black twine and I'm going to tie that in a little bow. And it did just take me a little while here. The bow is going to end up really quite small, so it was a little bit fiddly. So just trying to get that the size that I want it. And then I can bring in my scissors and cut down those tails. And although I've got a little bit of that foam tape showing through the circle, I am going to adhere it down with a little bit of liquid glue as well, just to reinforce that. Make sure that that's going to stick down really nicely. So I'm just going to hold that in place with my finger. And whilst I'm there holding that bow down, I'm just going to grab my tweezers and lift up some of those petal pieces just to add a little bit more interest onto the card. Otherwise it is quite flat apart from that sentiment. So just lifting some of those up. Some of them didn't come up as well as I'd hoped. Maybe I added a little bit more glue than I thought I did. But some of them did lift up quite nicely. And like I say, it just adds a little bit of dimension onto the card so that it's not so flat. And then to finish off, I'm adding some black enamel dots. So using my perfect picker there to pick those up. And then I can place them down. And I'm just going to add 3 onto the card. I thought I would add this one here overlapping the leaf, but I decided to add it a little bit higher. I thought it just balanced it out a little bit more. And you can see those scoring lines there towards the bottom now, just about. So that is the card finished for today. I really love this set. It's really clever how it comes together, where you line up the die cuts with the stamping. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.